On today's show, part 2 of our Houston Rockets quarter season check-in, Amen Thompson, how is he handling adjusting to the point guard position? What about Reed Sheppard in a much bigger role this season and more? It's all being unpacked right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Now, the #1 sports podcast network. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. On today's show, we've got part 2 of our Houston Rockets quarter season roundtable check-in. If you missed part 1, go check out that conversation. I guess it's not a requirement that you check out that conversation before this one, but I think it would be beneficial because we recorded the whole thing like back to back. So be sure to be on the lookout for that if you haven't seen it in your feed. But on this edition of the quarter season roundtable check-in, we'll be talking a lot about Amen Thompson and his role within the Rockets team dynamic, him playing on ball versus off ball, as well as how he's adjusting to the point guard experience, Reed Sheppard and his flashes of brilliance so far this season, what we can expect out of him as he continues to grow and develop, and a lot more. We're unpacking all of that on this edition. First, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being one of our amazing everydayers. Let's talk a little bit about the Rockets point guard debacle here, right? Because obviously one of the big storylines coming into the season was no Fred VanVliet, lost him. They haven't ruled him out technically for the whole year, but I think for all intents and purposes, right, season-ending injury for Fred VanVliet. It would be a miracle for him to come back in any meaningful capacity at the end of this season or for some kind of a postseason run, even though they haven't ruled it out yet. Let's just operate under the assumption Fred's not coming back. So a big part of this season has been watching this team struggle at times without a traditional point guard to run the show. And they've, entrusted Amen Thompson with a lot of ball handling responsibility. They've empowered Reed Sheppard. He got a chance to start a couple of games, and he's had some really impressive stretches in his own right. Let's focus on Amen Thompson here for a moment. How are we feeling about the Amen Thompson, we'll call it the experiment so far, putting the ball in his hands, letting him run the show, letting him initiate offense so far this season? B. Scott, what you got?
Yeah, it's been a little rough at times, but what's amazing about Amen Thompson is how there have been a number of games and a number of games recently where it's like, oh man, this is looking really rough. Like Amen Thompson is he seems a little bit out of control. His handle's a little loose, and he's stumbling, falling with the ball or missing a point blank layup or something like that. And then you look up and he's like 12, 6, and 6 in the second quarter or something like that, super efficient and having a really good game. And so like the complaint, it feels like a luxury complaint because overall I feel like he's still a plus player and really, really, really good for them. But specific to the conversation that we're having now, just playing the point guard position, setting guys up, it hasn't been ideal.
Well, let me scale it back a little bit, B.
Okay.
Scott. Maybe less so about just the specific of him being the point guard and more just his role all encompassing, right? Because the problem here is he's so good in his ancillary role playing off the ball. And that's kind of the issue here, is because they're balancing when they do play him on ball and they're, trying to dedicate those reps to him. But then you have the games like the Phoenix game where he really wasn't on ball that much against Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
He did so much of his damage off the ball. And it's like, he can be an all-star playing off the ball. And so that's where I think the discussion is so interesting, is you've got people on both sides who are, some people are completely against the idea and they're like, they feel like it's wasted development reps. And then other people are like, no, it makes more sense. Like they want to see if they can increase his ceiling, if he can become that player. So it doesn't specifically just have to be about him as the point guard, but just kind of the battle between these two roles, I guess.
Well, and I think that's kind of to the point here, is that like there's a balancing act here. It's not like he's just going to be off ball all the time or just on ball all the time. There's a little bit of mixing and matching and a little bit of a chess game that they're trying to play here when they play him on ball, when they play him off ball, like what personnel groupings and what circumstance dictate which strategy they go with. And so Look, man, I think overall, I don't know what exactly everybody was expecting from Amen Thompson. I know there was a lot of hype coming into the season, especially after last year, the All-NBA year, the All-Defensive year, and just kind of him being kind of bursting onto the scene after the Jabari Smith injury and him getting in the starting lineup and kind of just never looking back from there. But this season, I've actually, even in times, every time that I find myself complaining about Amen Thompson, I look up and it's usually a super efficient game. He's having an impact play or 2 or 3 on defense. And so, yeah, no, for the most part, I've actually been okay with it, even if I can acknowledge that the point guard thing is not ideal. But look, the point, I would go back to our earlier discussion about Alperen Sengun. That to me is where some of the nuance gets lost in this a little bit of like, oh, how is Amen Thompson doing at point guard? Well, if you're watching the games, if you're really paying attention, by and large, they are using a combination of guys to initiate their offense, whether it's Alperen Sengun, in the high post or at the elbow, or if it's Kevin Durant himself, right? They've got a number of ways to sort of, and they talked about this, right? What was going to be the approach? We're going to try to do this thing by committee. We're not going to just rely on Amen Thompson or Reed Sheppard or one specific guy to be our point guard. And that's what we're seeing. I think there is a lot of room for error with that, and I think at times we've seen that when it's looked clunky at times, but I've actually been fine by and large with Amen Thompson, with the exception of some moments or games here and there. I think for the most part, he's been really good.
Especially with the defense coming around. I think to start the year, and it was probably the cramping, but I think there was an adjustment period to playing. He mentioned it in the Mark Spears article a couple of days ago that playing the minutes he is and with the added responsibilities as the point guard, it's a jump up in role, in usage, and it took some time for him to get his legs underneath him. But as the defense has improved for Amen individually, it has for the team as well. And so when you get, I won't say he's quite to where he was last year, but he's a lot closer now than what he was at the beginning of the season. And so, yeah, between what he does off ball and the defense, he's still a very, very positive player. I think it's important to note that no matter what, the role of the so-called point guard was going to change as soon as the Rockets acquired Kevin Durant. Like, I think a lot of people are sort of comparing what Amen does now to what Fred did the last couple of years. And I'm sorry, it was never going to be a drop-in replacement. Obviously, they're different styles of players, Amen and Fred, but the role of the point guard was going to change no matter what. You weren't going to have as many pick and rolls when you have 2 top 15 players, and your most efficient actions, as Jackson said so many times, are typically 2-man games between KD and Alpi. So you were going to be asking the so-called point guard to do a little bit more off-ball no matter what. With Amen, the off-ball value is more as a cutter, as a mover, going downhill and threatening the defenses near the rim. With Fred, it's a little bit more as a shooter. But regardless, the role was going to change a little bit. And so some of the people comparing him directly to Fred the last couple of years, it's sort of setting Amen up to fail. Like, he's never going to succeed if you're expecting him to look like what Fred did the last 2 years, because the surrounding construct is just completely different, and what it takes to optimize this offense, which, by the way, has been top 5 all season long. So it's not like it's going terribly. But I do think that you need, in order to be a legitimate contender and have a chance to beat the Thunder 4 times out of 7, you need the best version of Amen Thompson. And that's where I think it's too early to panic. You talk to people inside the building at Toyota Center, and what they'll tell you is that if he just finishes at the level he did the last 2 years, we're having an entirely different conversation. Like, as of our recording, his true shooting is 54%. Last year, he was above 60. And so when you talk to people in the building, they say, look, if he's finishing like he did last year, then none of this is even a talking point, and he's maybe in the all-star conversations. Fair. However, you do have to wonder at some point, I don't think we're there yet, but you do have to wonder, is the change in role contributing to his drop in efficiency? In other words, when he's having to finish off an on-ball drive, when he's going to the bucket with the ball in his hands, does that make the finish more complicated than when he's moving off the ball? And so he's not having to worry about his footwork with the ball in his hands going from the 3-point line to the rim. I don't know the answer to that, and we're just a quarter into the season, but if it doesn't improve by, say, the midpoint of the season, that's where you do have to wonder, hey, is there something about the way he's being used that makes it more difficult to get the version of Amen you had a year ago. And it's important not to overreact. Look, he's just 22 years old, year 3. The worst thing you can do is pigeonhole any of your young guys. We talked about it with Sengun. Imagine if you had predetermined that he couldn't play with another big man, then you would have never found the double big with Steven Adams. So it's very important not to overreact and not give Amen on-ball responsibilities, because if he does develop on-ball, he's just 22 years old, we know how talented he is, then that only advances the ceiling that he has as a player. Yet there is a balancing act. You need to also make sure that you're not lowering the ceiling of this year's team, and you need to figure that out by the playoffs. And some of this may resolve organically in that as you get closer to the playoffs and closer to the trade deadline, we'll see how Reed Sheppard develops. We'll see if it's reasonable for Fred VanVliet to come back. We'll see if the Rockets make any moves on the trade market. Like, it may be that the Rockets bring in a so-called point guard, or Reed just proves worthy of starting point guard level minutes, to where Amen starts being used a little bit different just based on the framework of the team around him. But I do think it's a balancing act. You don't want to overreact, because if he develops as an on-ball guy, that's only to the betterment of the long-term formula of this team and his potential as a player. Yet, to win a title, you do need the best version of Amen Thompson, i.e. closer to the 60% true shooting guy he was a year ago. And at some point, it is fair to wonder if the on-ball usage, the uptick relative to last year, is contributing to the decline in finishing. To me, it's less about the point guard and it's more about the finishing.
Coming up, we keep the conversation focused on Amen Thompson and how the Rockets are balancing his 2 roles within the team's inner dynamics. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994, and with 48 different teams for the first time ever, it's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why the Game Time app is clutch, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging great seats. With Game Time, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open, and buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back in your hands and makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. You pull up the app, the layout makes it so simple to scroll through matchups and compare great seat views, pick a game, tap a section, and have your tickets locked in within minutes. No confusion, no hunting for the fine print. So take the guesswork out of buying your World Cup tickets. Every match, every concert, every event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go, Game Time. Today's episode is also brought to you by Quo. New year, new systems, and this is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of running a business and think there has to be a better way, and there is. Today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Q-U-O, the smarter way to run your business communications. If you're ready to make your workday smoother and keep customers connected without the headaches, Quo makes upgrading your setup easier than ever. A streamlined system makes such a big difference when communicating with customers. Having calls, texts, and voicemails in one clean view keeps everything organized and helps you stay responsive. Being able to share one team number makes it so much easier to make sure that nothing gets missed. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnba. That's QUO.com/lockedonnba. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Remember, the best way to help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. The comments help us out a ton on YouTube, guys. Thank you so much for commenting on the videos. I promise you it helps us out a lot. Let's go ahead and dive back into our roundtable discussion with some more on Amen Thompson.
I definitely believe the on ball is contributing more. And I often feel that Amen, because he's trying to balance all these new talents in the offense, that he often defers in a way that surprises me. And I think he plays a bit safe in that way. And what I mean by that is I expected Amen Thompson as a point guard to be a bit more aggressive, getting to the basket, getting in the paint, getting 2 feet in the paint and finishing through contact, or making plays for others. And I think he right now is more so thinking the position rather than playing it and trying to make sure everybody else is involved, make sure everybody's kind of happy. And that's the job of a point guard. But I think it's come to the detriment of his development as a really an on-ball creator, right? But this is a young player who's playing point guard for the first time in his career, right? And so we have to be patient with Amen as he explores these portions of his game. But there is some clear things that Amen Thompson is much, much better than he was last year. Ball handling. I was very skeptical that Amen Thompson would be able to handle ball pressure up and down the court in the manner that he's done this year. Yes, you still have some issues with every now and again, like all players, but by and large, this guy has improved incredibly with his ball handling. It hasn't really translated to the finishing at the rim, but I think it has translated to getting Rockets into sets, in and out of sets, and it has translated to increased assists, right? I think him able to get downhill in certain possessions has allowed for him to get an uptick in his assists, and I would like to see more of that. But I understand that this is a difficult thing for a young player to do. Point guard is the hardest position to play, and right now I think Amen, because he's playing it a bit safe or a bit careful as he learns the position. He's more of a guy who just brings the ball up the court and gives it to Alperen Sengun or Kevin Durant, who are our real point guards. These are the real initiators of the offense. We're not getting the stretches of brilliance of Russell Westbrook, or the way Russell Westbrook puts so much pressure on the rim that he completely changes the landscape. I was expecting to see not that all game, but stretches, real dominant stretches of that from Amen in pockets, right? And I think we still can get to that. We just he just hasn't found his footwork in that just yet. But all in all, that's why I think there's a bit of mixed results. For the most part, Amen Thompson is an off-ball player for this team. That's what he does right now, right? He brings the ball up, he calls the play, but as a primary initiator, he's not really doing much of that, to me, in my opinion, right now. But because he's not doing much of that, I think the most disappointing part of where I feel Amen is at right now is the defense, and as Ben was saying, it's been getting better, right?
But it's still not to last year.
Yeah, but it's still not to last. And this is an all NBA level defensive guy, right?
No, hey, don't tell Anthony Davis that.
Oh yeah, no, you're still gonna see brilliance because but there's a certain level of expectation when you reach a certain level, and now our expectations are much higher for him, especially defensively. And with the loss of Dillon Brooks, our emotional leader. Last year, Amen Thompson was hands down our best defensive player, but Dillon Brooks was the guy who ignited the team defensively, emotionally, with toughness, with grit, right? And Amen Thompson has a lot of that inside him. Just ask Tyler Hero. You know what I mean?
I think there's still skid marks on the Toyota Center floor. So,
bro, but that's what I'm saying. So, those are the things as a young player. I'd like him to take more charge. I like Amen. There are things that he can do. I think right now, if he comes in and just say, hey, defensively, I set the tone. You know what I mean? And that's a thing, a role that this Rockets team, I think, is missing right now with the loss of Dillon Brooks and Fred VanVliet. If he just comes in and say, hey, I set the tone defensively, right? Where I get guys amped up to play defense. That's the type of stuff that I think really will help this team reach another level right now. And that's the role I think I'd like to see Amen kind of grow in as he's still figuring out the point guard position. But I say this to say this is a testament again to how Alperen Sengun has gone up a level in usage and play, but has maintained his defensive level, right? And now we're watching Amen Thompson actually struggle with that, which is normal, right? Especially for young players. But I just want to give that caveat because we're literally watching the opposite of that happen with another young player that we have on our team.
Yep.
To your point, Madison, we discussed that the other. I forget if it was you and I or maybe
Yeah.
I think we talked about defense. Having like a defensive like quarterback, right? Somebody to embrace that role, that kind of hole that Dillon left in the roster. And I think Amen is perfectly equipped to do that. To your point about his aggressive play, right? I think that Amen is absolutely cut from that same cloth, right? As a Russell Westbrook type, a Derrick Rose type, a guy that needs to put downhill pressure on the defense. He's not going to be your traditional table setting point guard like a Chris Paul or a Fred VanVliet, right? That's not his bag. That's not him at his best. And it's a disservice to play him that way. And to your point, I do think he's been kind of thinking the position, not just playing it. And I also think that unfortunately, given some of the constraints that the Rockets have had with their personnel this season, we just haven't seen the right lineups to really feature that version of Amen Thompson yet. We will at some point, fingers crossed, right? Like knock on wood, once the health of this team is no longer in question, you're going to be able to run some 5-out lineups that have all the spacing in the world where you just give the ball to Amen, put the ball in his hands and say, get downhill, buddy, have fun. Because it's you versus the defender. And if they send a help defender, that's a wide open kick out for a 3, or you're going to draw a foul, or you're going to get a bucket at the rim. Like that simple, very easy Russell Westbrook, kind of Giannis-esque blueprint for the offense that we haven't seen in effect yet, unfortunately, because by necessity, the Rockets have had to pretty much always run a big at some point. And to his credit, Sengun could be used as a 5-out spacing big now, but they're running the double big a lot, and the double big does absolutely no favors for Amen Thompson when he's on the floor because it mucks up all the spacing. He doesn't get to play out of the dunker spot anymore because one of the bigs is down there. He winds up having to play out of the far corner, and he winds up sometimes settling for more threes than you'd like to see him taking. So it's all one big kind of adjustment period for Amen Thompson. But to Ben's point, right? Don't panic. This is all kind of by design, right? And the Rockets are fleshing things out, trying to, overall just increase their ceiling, or the overall ceiling of this team for further down the line as they have these championship aspirations for later on this season. I do want to.
By the way, KD and Sengun are going to dial up, as you mentioned earlier in the pod. They're going to dial up their usage more as you get closer to the playoffs anyway. So some of this, again, is going to resolve organically.
We don't talk about it organically here on the show, Ben. Stop that. Coming up, we shift the conversation over to Reed Sheppard and some of his flashes of brilliance this season, as well as what he still has to work on in his game moving forward. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Zocdoc. Look, guys, it's 2025, almost 2026, and those days of waiting for something to become a full-blown emergency before you see a doctor, they're over. No more walking it off for 6 months. No more pretending that weird shoulder stiffness is just sleeping wrong. It's time to take your health seriously, and Zocdoc makes that easier than ever because staying healthy is more than hitting the gym or eating right. It's about actually getting things checked out when something feels off. Using Zocdoc makes scheduling easier. Search for in-network doctors and book right in the app. Real appointment times are listed, including same-day visits. No more back-and-forth phone calls or waiting weeks to be seen. Super helpful for routine checkups and those little issues that you've been meaning and probably putting off getting checked out. So stop putting off your doctor's appointments and get the care that you need. Go to Zocdoc.com/LockedOnNBA to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's Zocdoc.com, ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNBA, Zocdoc.com/LockedOnNBA. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Let's go ahead and dive into the final leg of our Rockets quarter season roundtable discussion with some Reed Sheppard talk and a few other topics. All right, let's talk a little bit about Reed Sheppard though as well, because Reed has, he's had some moments of utter brilliance this season, and he's also had some shortcomings as a player. We don't need to spend forever on Reed, but just really quickly, thoughts on Reed Sheppard so far here in year 2, Ben.
Yeah, I think as of Thanksgiving, he had the number 5 rating in box plus minus in the entire NBA, which was ridiculous. And the other 4 players that were in front of him were Jokic, SGA, Giannis, and Luka. Now, it's just one metric, but that is ridiculous. And I do think that it's fair to say that overall, now I know the last week wasn't too kind to him, but still, overall, he's been better than anyone inside the building expected in year 2. Like, everyone was high on him as a prospect, but to see him contributing to winning for a good team to the extent that he did over the first 6 weeks or so of this season, to me, it was easily the biggest surprise and is the biggest surprise to this point. And the question is how sustainable it is. Like, he's come back to earth a little bit over the past week. And so going into, I guess, quarter 2 of the season, that's what I want to find out. Like, what is the realistic expectation for Reed Sheppard the remainder of this season? We know what the long term can be, but in terms of this year, how he fits into the formula, is he just a standard young player that's going to have peaks and valleys? And maybe, what we saw from Reed in November was analogous to, what we saw from Jalen Green in March of 24, where he just pops off, but the baseline's a little bit lower and there's going to be lots of highs and lows? Or is that something that already is, maybe not on an every game basis, but in the aggregate, a formula the Rockets can depend on? To me, that's the big question, because if what we've seen the last 6 weeks, the data speaks for itself. If that is legitimate, the Rockets may have their point guard by the playoffs already. He may already be on this roster. The Amen question, do they need to go and make a trade? All of that becomes almost irrelevant if the version of Reed Sheppard we saw in November is sustainable. We'll see. It's still too early to say, but to this point, yeah, you can't help but be pleased. Obviously, the three-point shooting was there, but he's gotten better with his craft, his touch in the mid-range, getting to the rim. Defensively, it's a mixed bag, but there's been games where he's been extremely impactful on that side. We made the comparisons to Sengun earlier. Yeah, very encouraged, but still early, need more data. That's where I'm at on Reed Sheppard.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, Ben. For now, I think what we've experienced is kind of nuclear stretch of shooting from Reed Sheppard that I think settled him down and kind of gave him the confidence and to know that I belong. I can play here. You know what I mean? And that's a mental step young players have to overcome. And I think he's overcome that. Now, in the past week, I think he's come back down to earth. He hasn't been, his shooting hasn't been bad, but it just hasn't been to that nuclear level. And that's as expected as well, because it takes consistency for young players it's going to take time. We watched it with Jabari Smith. We watched it with Alperen Sengun, right? This is just normal. We've seen this. We know how player development works, and that's what's going to go. So I expect him to fluctuate in those ways where he's going to have stretches where he's just nuclear. But what I want the fans to understand is as those lows become less and less likely, we're going to start entering an all-star level, and possibly a superstar level upside for Reed Sheppard. And that's been the most encouraging thing for me, is that there's real star equity here, right? Yeah. And now we've seen it. It's on paper. We knew it was there from the prospect lens, but now we've seen it on the court, right? And it's just how consistent can those things bear out. And that's what's so exciting about Reed Sheppard. And honestly, after the first couple games, a lot of us were very worried, right? But for him to turn it around in that manner and actually become one of the Rockets' best players, forcing the issue, I really am proud of Reed. And we've seen his defense actually take some steps. But as Reed becomes more of a threat, coaches will game plan for him and things will get more difficult. And one of the ways that they're game planning for him is they're actually just going to put him in every set, right? He's the focal point in every set. And so Reed is going through a process where he's going to have to learn how to handle that, how to be targeted, right? And still maintain his play, because that is sweat equity. If I'm in every set and then I have to come back and shoot 55% for three, you know what I mean? That's what's going to start to happen to him, because he's a real threat, right? And also he needs to improve. But all in all, I like how Reed has improved defensively. His physicality is ticked up from the first week of the game, right? And that has just done a lot for him. And now he still has those bright spots of defensive playmaking, which is his best asset, right? And so those types of things for Reed, I'm really proud and really excited to see him, because there's real star equity there. It's just now let's go through the process. Let's enjoy this journey with him to see how good this guy can become.
Yeah, I'm with Madison on the star equity term. You sold me. You got me there, man. I want to be clear and on the record here, a full-on Reed Sheppard stand, and that's with every flaw in his game that I acknowledge. I'm not trying to excuse or pretend like it doesn't exist. Look, it's funny to me, because we already know how good the Rockets are defensively. He is the one. It's like other teams see red, because there's nobody else on the team that you can really hunt. There's no easy out. There's no real strategy for attacking this defense until you see Reed Sheppard out there and you're like, oh my God, there it is. There's my opportunity. There's my chance to not have to go up against some insane athletic freak or somebody that's 6'10" or taller or whatever it is. Everybody else actually has, even Josh Okogie, who's 6'3" or 6'4", whatever he is, has this 7-foot wingspan and can cover ground more than I guess he looks like he can. So that's the weakness now, is that you can you can kind of point Reed Sheppard out still as kind of a duck in the lineup, but everything aside from that, I'm not going to say makes up for it, but it justifies his spot on the floor and his place in the lineup. And again, I go back to Madison's point about star equity and what Ben is saying about that November. Like that is, it offers a glimpse into the future, I think. I think it is foreshadowing what Reed Sheppard can potentially be for this team. One of my favorite things right now is to see whenever Reed Sheppard and Amen Thompson get minutes with the bench, right? And so it's almost like they've got this two-pronged lethal offense, or potentially, I'm not going to say that Reed and Amen are lethal yet, but like if you can start off with KD and KD and Alperen two-man game, and that's how you sort of attack the beginning of the game, and then your bench unit is led by Reed Sheppard and Amen Thompson. Okay, well, I'm calling him the duck on defense, but where do you escape when you're trying to defend the Rockets, right? Like if you've got that many guys that can, go for 25 or more, or obviously we've seen Reed like really light it up a time or two. Look, man, I am pleased with Reed Sheppard's development, even in acknowledging that the defense has got to improve. And, I think a lot of what we want to see out of Reed is just going to come from experience and just time on the floor. We've talked about all the young guys being young guys, even Sengun, who, is really a veteran now. But Reed Sheppard's 21 years old in his second season, did not get a lot of burn last year. And so now he's really getting his first, really being exposed to heavy NBA minutes for the first time. The Warriors game, I keep going back. Bro took 25 shots. I know they were undermanned, but 25 shots. Like I don't think he had taken more than 13 up until that point. And I don't think he's taken more than 17 in his entire career other than that. That was probably the OKC game last year. So that just showed the confidence that they have in him, the confidence that he has in himself. And I think that we are kind of to Ben's point earlier, like the whole point guard thing might end up correcting itself just by Reed Sheppard getting that experience out there.
And funny enough, one of the ultimate silver linings to this Rocket season, regardless of how it plays out, is, if you want to look at the Fred VanVliet and try to spin the injury in a positive way, right, is we're getting all of these different experiences that we're talking about here. We're getting the Alperen Sengun Shin Hub experience by necessity. We're seeing Kevin Durant as a playmaker by necessity. We're seeing Amen Thompson and Reed Sheppard with drastically increased roles by necessity. And it's kind of this forced acceleration of development timeline for this Rocket squad, where think about everything they're going through this year, regardless of whether this season ends with them hoisting the Larry O'Brien or not. This group, this team will be far and away better for it because of all the, everything that they underwent this season. And then, knock on wood, hopefully, right? But then they'll get Fred VanVliet back next year, and then they'll be that much better for it, because then Reed will be so much better and Amen will be so much better, and you'll be able to then just airdrop Fred VanVliet back into the mix of it, and Fred will be himself again, hopefully, right? Post-injury Fred VanVliet, it's not a guarantee, but I will say the shooting was never a concern with me for Reed, right? Like it's great that he's been more confident in his shot and we're seeing it like actually translate, but the playmaking to me has just popped. Like it's been so good watching him, and he makes some ridiculous passes, like the little like cross court skip passes to a wide open corner shooter, or some of the little touch passes where he knows immediately where the ball is going to go. The moment his hands are on it, he's making the next pass because he knows, hey, I've got an okay shot. Like I could let this rip, but if I swing it one more time, it's a wide open shot for Jabari or KD or Tari or whoever else that he's swinging it to. And some of those moments have been really encouraging. And I think as well too, there was a concern, right? Reed's a little smaller, a little undersized, whatever. It doesn't have like an explosive first step or anything. What's it going to look like? And it's good. We can go all the way back to like Summer League, right? When he got clamped in that Pistons game in Summer League, and I was like, damn, this does not look good. Dude couldn't get his own shot off, right? It would look really bad. Reed is always going to be in that same mold of a Fred VanVliet or a Chris Paul-esque type player who is more effective when I'm not going to say needs a screen, but is significantly more effective when he gets a good screen to start the action. And then watching him like snake pick and rolls and navigate pick and roll and get into the teeth of the defense and weave through traffic, like that in conjunction with the playmaking has been so encouraging. I have zero concerns about Reed's ability to play point guard long-term in the NBA right now. Right now, the only question I have about Reed will be, how does the defense progress and what does it ultimately look like? Can he get to a level where the defense is just not a liability? Because I do think his ceiling as an offensive player is going to be so impactful in the grand scheme of things that as long as he's not a negative liability on defense, he's going to be a starting caliber player. And to Madison's point, he's going to have star equity, or he has star equity, and we're going to see that hopefully blossom throughout his career. I do want to ask you guys, as we kind of, round things out here, is there anything, a topic or a player that we didn't talk about, or a talking point that you want to bring up, maybe an underreported storyline, anything from this season that you guys want to discuss really quickly before we wrap things up? I'm opening the floor.
I just like to say we finally also reached a point where all our young guys are coming to their own in confidence and becoming professionals with above average shooting percentages, right? I think the Rockets have suffered from the 3-point line for a long time, right? And guys kind of not really reaching their benchmark at the 3-point line, guys miscommunicated defensively, right? And I think the others, the Jabari Smiths, the Tari Easons, those guys have become true professionals at this level now. We're entering into two true professionals who are bringing a level of consistency that they have had not yet shown. And I think that overall is why this team's offense is so good. Even when you think about just making the extra passing, being so unselfish, understanding that the ball needs to be light, it needs to move. I think this team as a connective passing group has improved as well. As ball handling across the board has improved, shooting across the board has improved, and that has led to this resurgence in our offense, even with our floor general being out. And even with, some of the issues we're at, guys with new roles, cast as new roles, these guys are still very efficient. And it's because our young guys have, to me, become true professionals at this level. And so that's all I'd say.
One guy out there, a quick shout out to Jabari Smith Jr. It doesn't show it in the traditional stats, but I do think he's taken a leap forward in several areas. I think defensively, he's moving more fluidly on the perimeter. Offensively, I think he's attacking closeouts better. You can see the skills development work he did this offseason with Aaron Miller. And I think that's only going to be more important as the season moves along, because in these high leverage games, and especially as you get to the playoffs, teams are going to hunt your weakness. We saw what the Warriors did to Jalen Green a year ago. And I think that while the overall value of Jabari might not be dramatically different, at least in terms of how it comes off in the traditional stats, I do think that areas of Jabari's game that were clear weaknesses the last couple of years, they aren't as clear weaknesses right now. Maybe they're not like huge strengths, but I think he's taken some things like the ball handling, like how he moves against some quicker guards in the perimeter, things that were clear deficiencies, and made them to where if they're not a strength, they're at least passable now. They're at least pretty good. And I think as this year moves along, and as opposing defenses, really dial up the scouting reports and hone in on exactly what the Rockets do and don't do well, the fact that Jabari's floor across the board is much higher now than it was a year or two ago, and again, just 22 years old, you would expect this to happen. That's why you got to have a long leash with these young guys. I think that's going to be a more important storyline as you get closer to the playoffs. The fact that Jabari doesn't have these holes in his game the way he did the last couple of years. He's much more well-rounded, and across the board, he's a very good player overall.
Yeah, look, I want to co-sign everything that Ben just said about Jabari Smith. I wanted to point that out as well. I think that between Kevin Durant's arrival, obviously, and Alperen Sengun's ascension, and then the focus and fixation on Amen Thompson and Reed Sheppard and their development, it's kind of made Jabari Smith a little bit of an underrated story here. And his improvement in everything that Ben just kind of rattled off there, I think is spot on. So I will point out Jabari Smith Jr. I would say one thing that's also impressed me about the team overall, and we've hit on a lot of this on why this is, but as a team overall, it's impressed me how they're this good offensively, right? Top 5 in offensive rating have been all season, and last in 3-point shooting or 3-point attempts, I should say. Yes. They're able to generate all of this offense and be as productive as they have been this season without high volume 3-point shooting. And I think that's just a testament to how they play and the team, how they've been built, I should say, and the team identity overall. And that has really impressed me, especially as we sit here in 2025, the name of the game, threes more than two. It's been this way for a decade now. So it's not like I'm talking about a new thing, but it is against the grain and it is working for the Rockets. And it's really impressive to see that they've built a team and they've got the kind of players that can play that way.
Houston's always been that kind of trend-setting organization, so maybe we'll see a bit of a shift in the basketball kind of ethos where you start to go away from the three-point shooting or prioritizing the high-quality threes and just instead of just the sheer volume of threes, which the Rockets did once upon a time as well. They were like, we'll just get more threes up than anybody else, and we'll be the better team because of it, because the math is there. 3 is greater than 2. I will say one quick shout-out as we're wrapping things up. Josh Okogie, right, who was signed to be like a third string depth piece addition, has been tasked with being a starter for like 2/3 of the season so far. He has been just nothing short of pretty awesome for this Rockets team. You know, he's in a role that is well beyond, I think, the scope of what he was signed to do here. He was signed to be probably that, you know, the fifth member of that stay ready crew at the end of the bench and maybe play some situational minutes in certain matchups. But with all the adversity this Rockets team has faced, with all the injuries, with still whether or not DFS even exists anymore, I don't know. But like with everything going on with this team, Josh Okogie stepped in the starting lineup and he helped kind of instill, you know, bring back some of that defensive edge. And, you know, he helps a ton on that side of the floor. And offensively, he hasn't been, you know, disappointing either. He's shot the ball, you know, respectably from 3. He hustles, he fights after, you know, loose balls. He does a lot of that kind of dirty work stuff that you expect like a hustle guy to be able to do. And so I just think that he deserves a little bit of a shout out for his role in the success of this Rockets team this season.
They're now 13-2 with Josh in the starting lineup. It's 15-6 overall, but 13-2 with Josh as a starter. And one of the 2 losses was in Dallas the other night, which you have to throw out because they were without 5 rotation players. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head. He's been a massive part of how they've overcome no Dorian Finney-Smith. You've got on the sidebar the biggest disappointments. To me, the lack of availability of Dorian Finney-Smith. Now it's going to stretch into January. I don't know that there was necessarily a setback, but I think clearly his ankle hasn't progressed to the extent that he or the team had hoped when he underwent that surgery in the offseason. Like, if he was going to miss half the season and now the target is January, Jackson, that's midway through the season. And they're typically, if a guy's going to miss at least half the season, you see a little bit more bracing. Like, the first we even heard that DFS might not be ready for the season was on Media Day. Brian Windhorst mentioned it as a by-the-by in the ESPN story. There was no bracing from the organization telling us that, hey, this guy might miss half the season. And so I think clearly maybe he hasn't had a setback, but it just hasn't progressed as rapidly as they had hoped. And so we know the role the Rockets had in mind for DFS, especially after losing Dillon Brooks. And how have they survived it? Because Josh Okogie has basically become your replacement Dillon Brooks. And in the absence of DFS, with having to lose Dillon in the deal that brings Kevin Durant to Houston, yeah, the role of Josh Okogie has sort of flown under the radar, but it's a really important one.
Absolutely. All right. We want your thoughts on everything that we discussed in part 1 and part 2 of this kind of quarter season roundtable. Check in, give us all your thoughts in the YouTube comments, everything that we discussed from Kevin Durant to Alperen Sengun to Amen Thompson. Let us know all your thoughts in the comments. Everybody, you know the drill. Let everybody know where to track you down at. We'll go Madison, then Madison, then Brandon, then Ben in a row. Go.
Okay. You can find me on Twitter at MattManLeaks. Come talk to Rockets basketball and NBA draft.
And you can find me at Brandon K. Scott on Twitter as well, and also the B Block Podcast, wherever it is that you get your podcast.
Yep. Ben DuBose on all the social media networks, rocketswire.usatoday.com for all your daily Houston Rockets news coverage, and Rockets Launch Pod wherever you listen to your podcast.
That's going to do it for our Houston Rockets quarter season roundtable check-in. That was part 2. If you missed part 1, go back and check that out as well. Thank you so much for checking out both hopefully you checked out both episodes. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, hopefully talking about a Rockets win against the Clippers. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.